Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today, we're embarking on a journey maybe into some surprisingly treacherous terrain, human relationships. Specifically, we're looking at a principle that really challenges one of our most, deeply held beliefs, the value of friendship. Our sources today, they invite us to unwrap this particularly provocative piece of wisdom, law number 2, and it declares, never put too much trust in friends. Learn how to use enemies. Now, that statement, it initially sounds cynical, maybe even, well, jarring. But as we delve into the history and the psychology behind it, you'll discover a surprisingly pragmatic, though maybe stark, perspective on human nature and the dynamics of power.
It truly is a bold claim, isn't it? It immediately makes you ask why. Why would trust, especially in those we consider closest to us, be framed as like a potential liability rather than this undeniable asset? The sources suggest that friends, kind of paradoxically, can actually become far more dangerous, more prone to envy, even, outright betrayal than our declared adversaries.
More dangerous than enemies.
Yeah. And the really counterintuitive part, that if you somehow find yourself without enemies, you might actually be strategically better off finding a way to create them. It's a chilling thought, definitely, but one that our historical examples show is, well, deeply rooted in observing how people behave, especially in these high-stakes situations.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
This deep dive, it isn't about pushing cynicism just for the sake of it. It's more about understanding a particular dynamic, power, human nature, something that seems to have played out again and again across different time, different places. We've got some absolutely fascinating history ahead. We'll look at a cautionary tale, one that unfolds almost like a Shakespearean tragedy, vividly showing the catastrophic results of ignoring this law. And then we'll pivot, look at a surprising success story that completely flips conventional wisdom on its head, revealing the profound advantages of actually observing this very same seemingly harsh principle.
Right. Our mission today is to go way beyond just the surface of the startling claim. We're going to meticulously dig into historical events that powerfully demonstrate both the acute perils of misplaced trust and, on the other side, the strategic brilliance of intelligently engaging with one's adversaries. We'll explore the subtle yet really potent psychological reasons why friends might turn focusing on those often overlooked forces like envy, resentment, and this particular kind of corrosive ingratitude. And critically, we'll dissect the strategic value some of history's most successful leaders found in engaging with and even, converting their enemies. You'll probably leave this deep dive with a sharpened, maybe even slightly uncomfortable new perspective on loyalty, ambition, and the true cost of misplaced trust when you're trying to gain or maintain power or security.
So let's jump straight into the core of law number 2. The initial judgment is blunt, almost shockingly so. Be wary of friends. They will betray you more quickly, for they are easily aroused to envy. They also become spoiled and tyrannical. That's quite an accusation against the very people we're usually taught to hold dear. It seems to fly directly in the face of, everything we're taught about relationships and the bonds we build. It suggests that the very closeness, the familiarity of friendship, far from being a solid support, can actually create fertile ground for resentment and ultimately betrayal.
Indeed. And what's truly fascinating here is the underlying psychological insight the source offers. It posits that familiarity, and particularly the perception of getting favors or continuous support, can surprisingly breed resentment rather than the gratitude we might instinctively expect. Think about it. When you consistently do favors for a friend or you give them gifts, opportunities, a curious and often, destructive dynamic can emerge. Instead of building loyalty and deepening the bond, it can inadvertently create this sense of entitlement in the person receiving.
Entitlement, really?
Yeah, they might start to feel that your generosity is just, their due. Or even worse, they might subconsciously resent being in that position of receiving because it kind of reminds them of their dependence on your goodwill.
That's a powerful thought. And a bit unsettling. We tend to assume kindness brings kindness back, right? That favors build loyalty. But you're suggesting the opposite can happen.
Precisely. The source argues that when someone receives so much, they often begin to believe their success is entirely their own doing, or at least that they've earned it through their own merits, not because of your help, your patronage. This isn't always conscious ingratitude. It's often a subtle psychological shift, a reinterpretation. To maintain their self-image as competent and deserving, their brain might sort of actively reframe your gift as just a deserved outcome. The giver then becomes this constant reminder of their perceived dependence, fostering a subconscious resentment, not loyalty. This emotional investment friends have, combined with this shifting perception, can tragically cloud their judgment. It leads directly to envy when they see your rise, especially if they think, hey, I'm just as good, maybe better.
Wow.
This raises a really uncomfortable question for all of us. Is our natural instinct to trust those closest to us actually a major blind spot? Especially when navigating environments where power or security is really on the line, are we, in our desire for connection, making ourselves profoundly vulnerable to the very people we assume are absolutely on our side?
And then comes the truly shocking part of this law, the part that probably makes most people stop and do a double take. But hire a former enemy, and he will be more loyal than a friend because he has more to prove. In fact, you have more to fear from friends than from enemies. If you have no enemies, find a way to make them. I mean, this completely upends our usual understanding of alliances, doesn't it? It suggests a declared adversary, once you bring them into your fold, can actually be a far more reliable asset than, say, a lifelong friend.
This is where the pragmatic, almost cold brilliance of the law really comes through. The logic is that an enemy, once converted or brought into your service, operates from this position of, well, profound debt, or a desperate desire to prove their worth. They have everything to gain, really nothing to lose, right? Having been spared or elevated or given a new chance from a position of opposition or weakness, they expect nothing and suddenly they receive everything. This can cultivate a deep, enduring sense of gratitude and a powerful drive to continuously demonstrate their loyalty. It's a transactional basis for allegiance rather than an emotional one, and the source argues this can be far more stable, more predictable in the volatile world of power because it's based on clear self-interest and a profound sense of obligation.
So the loyalty isn't clouded by all those expectations of emotional give and take or old resentments, maybe. It's a cleaner, more direct motivation, you're saying.
Precisely. And the idea of creating enemies, it isn't about just stirring up conflict for chaos's sake. That would be self-destructive, obviously. It's more about having clear opposition that can define and sharpen your purpose. An external foe can rally support against a common threat. It can prevent internal stagnation, disunity. It provides clarity, a tangible target. And as we'll see, it can even be strategically leveraged to your advantage. It forces you to define yourself, your values, your objectives with much greater precision.
Right, okay. To really get the teeth of this law, we need to look at what happens when it's tragically ignored. And for that, we turn to the mid-9th century Byzantine Empire, the genuinely tragic cautionary tale of Emperor Michael III. This story, it serves as a monument, really, to the perils of blind trust and profoundly misplaced affection. It's a direct consequence of ignoring law number 2.
Michael III, yeah. A young and, frankly, rather inexperienced ruler. He found himself in an incredibly precarious spot, very volatile. His mother, Empress Theodora, she'd been banished to a nunnery, and her lover brutally murdered, all orchestrated by his own ambitious uncle, Bardas. So, in this time of intense danger, surrounded by, as the source says, intriguers, murderers, and profligates at court, Michael desperately needed someone he felt he could implicitly trust, his chief counselor, someone whose loyalty he believed was absolute. And his thoughts, quite naturally you might think, turned to his best friend, a man named Basilius.
Basilius, an unlikely choice, putting it mildly. He was a young groom from humble peasant Macedonian stock, literally the head of the royal stables. Zero experience in government, none of the complex, cutthroat world of court politics. But, and this is key, he had proven his loyalty to Michael dramatically years before. He'd courageously saved Michael's life from a wild horse during a hunt. Michael was so impressed by this single act of courage, this devotion, that he immediately pulled Basilius up from obscurity, showered him with gifts, sent him to the best school in Byzantium, essentially turned this crude peasant into a cultured, sophisticated courtier. Sounds almost like a fairy tale, doesn't it?
It does, but it's a setup for profound tragedy. Michael believed that Basilius, who, quote, owed him everything for this incredible rise, would therefore be the most loyal, the most reliable person for such a crucial, powerful role. He completely ignored advice from seasoned advisors who recommended the much more qualified, much more experienced Bardas, his own uncle, for the job. Instead, Michael chose to train his brother, Basilius, for the post of chamberlain and chief counselor. Michael was, in essence, blinded by the emotional bond, by the perceived debt of gratitude. He thought that was a stronger foundation for loyalty than competence or proven experience or even family ties. He saw devotion. He didn't see the ambition lurking underneath.
So Basilius learns the ropes, starts advising on, all matters of state, and actually he proves surprisingly good at the mechanics of power. But there's a problem growing fast. Money. Basilius is just insatiably greedy. The splendor, the opportunities of the Byzantine court. It ignited this deep, burning hunger in him for the perks, the privileges of power. Michael, wanting desperately to keep his trusted friend satisfied, loyal, kept doubling, then tripling his salary, ennobling him, raising his status, even, get this, marrying him off to Michael's own mistress, Eudoxia Ingerina. Michael genuinely believed that keeping his trusted friend happy was worth any price, any extravagance, just to secure his unwavering loyalty.
And this highlights that critical point from the source. The more favors you bestow, often the less genuine gratitude you receive. The source suggests the receipt of a favor can become oppressive. It leads people to feel they've somehow earned their success through their own inherent qualities, rather than received it as charity. When someone's given so much, they frequently start to believe it's their due, right? Not a gift to be thankful for. They might even come to resent the benefactor for making them feel indebted, for reminding them of their former lesser status. This profound psychological shift can turn a beneficiary into an ingrate. And Michael, in his boundless generosity, was inadvertently just fueling Basilius's sense of entitlement, literally digging his own grave with every gift he gave.
And here's where it gets really, truly chilling. Basilius, now hungry for even more power, and probably resentful of Bardas's lingering influence, starts skillfully poisoning Michael's ear. He constantly whispers doubts, accusations, convinces Michael that Bardas, his uncle, the capable head of the army, was hopelessly ambitious and would inevitably conspire against him, even though Bardas had actually helped Michael get the throne in the first place. Basilius masterfully manipulated Michael's deepest fears, his insecurities. Under Basilius's insidious poison, Michael reluctantly agrees to have his uncle murdered. And the most chilling part, Basilius himself, the best friend, personally stabs Bardas to death during a big horse race, right in front of everyone.
This marks a terrifying escalation. Basilius, the supposed friend who owed Michael everything, has now orchestrated and carried out the murder of the emperor's capable uncle. It demonstrates a cunning, a ruthless ambition that just completely overshadowed any emotional ties he might have had. Immediately after, he boldly asked to replace Bardas as head of the army, swiftly consolidating his control over the empire's military might. This wasn't the act of a loyal friend, obviously. It was a calculated move by a ruthless opportunist who had now tasted blood in the intoxicating allure of unchecked power. He was systematically dismantling Michael's support structure and replacing it with his own network.
So a few years later, the chickens really come home to roost for Michael. He's facing severe financial problems, partly from his own extravagance, partly the court's demands. He asks Basilius to repay some of the money he had so generously loaned him over the years, and to Michael's, quote, shock and astonishment, Basilius flatly refuses. With an impudence that finally, jarringly, makes Michael realize his dire predicament. The former stable boy now had more money, more loyal allies in the army, the Senate, basically more actual power than the emperor himself. Michael, the benefactor, the one who elevated Basilius, was now ironically sort of subservient to his own creation.
The moment of realization, as the source puts it, it just came far, far too late. Michael had created a monster. He had allowed this man to see power up close, to taste its rewards. A man who then felt encumbered by the charity he had received and simply did what many people do in such a situation. They feted at the favors they have received and imagine they have earned their success by their own merits. The initial gratitude had completely curdled into this festering resentment, and Michael's initial kindness had become, well, nothing more than a burden to Basilius. Michael refused to see the escalating signs right, to acknowledge the blatant impudence, probably because the idea of a friend's betrayal was simply too painful or maybe utterly unthinkable for him to process.
And the tragic, inevitable end to this whole saga. Michael, after a night of heavy drinking, wakes up to find himself surrounded by Basilius's soldiers. Basilius himself is standing there, watching him passively as they stab the emperor to death. Then, after proclaiming himself the new emperor, Basilius rides triumphantly through Byzantium, brandishing the head of his former benefactor and best friend at the end of a long pike. A truly chilling, utterly complete betrayal. A stark testament to the danger of unexamined trust and the fatal flaw of assuming gratitude.
This story perfectly, brutally illustrates the danger of putting too much unquestioning faith in friends, especially when power is involved. The source quotes Diane de Poitiers, the influential mistress of Henri II of France. She wisely observed, "To have a good enemy, choose a friend." Bro. It's deeply cynical, but profoundly insightful because a friend knows all your weaknesses, right? Your secrets, your vulnerabilities, exactly where to strike if they decide to turn against you. Louis XIV's cynical observation also rings true here. Every time I bestow a vacant office, I make 100 discontented persons and one ingrate. And Baldassare Castiglione, the Renaissance courtier, offered that timeless warning never to trust so much in this tempting trap of friendship as to have cause to repent of it later on. Michael's friendship and love blinded every man to their interests. He clung to his disbelief, refused to acknowledge the truth of Basilius' ambition, right up until his own head was on that pike.
It's a harsh lesson, echoed by Voltaire's famous plea, "Lord, protect me from my friends, I can take care of my enemies." It feels so incredibly counterintuitive, doesn't it? We're taught from childhood, trust your friends implicitly, value loyalty above almost all else. But this law forces us to fundamentally question that assumption, at least in the, cutthroat arena of power and ambition.
And the source even provides this powerful, maybe slightly disturbing fable to further drive home the point about how pervasive ingratitude can be, demonstrating that kindness can often be met with the precise opposite, sometimes even outright hostility. It's the tale of a farmer who, out of compassion, saves a snake by letting it crawl into his belly to hide from hunters. Once the danger passes, the snake, finding it warm and safe inside, just refuses to leave. Desperate, the farmer seeks help from a heron who tells him to retch and strain to eject the snake. When the snake's head emerges, the heron swiftly catches it, pulls it out, kills it. The farmer, still worried about residual poison, then asks the heron for a cure. The heron suggests cooking and eating a white fowl. The farmer, without hesitation, declares the heron itself is a white fowl and immediately tries to cook and eat it.
No way.
Yeah. Fortunately, his wife, horrified, frees the heron, only for the heron to gouge out her eyes on its way out. The moral is stated as, when you see water flowing uphill, it means that someone is repaying an unkindness. It's a stark, brutal reminder that kindness can be met with the most brutal ingratitude, and that some natures are just inherently treacherous, regardless of the favors or life-saving acts they receive. The fable suggests that expecting gratitude can be a fatal flaw.
Wow. Okay, so if Michael III is the ultimate chilling cautionary tale of ignoring this law, who exemplifies the observance of it, the masterclass in applying it, our sources point to Emperor Sung, also known as General Chao Kuang-yen. He took the throne of China in AD 959. He inherited a situation just rife with instability, where becoming emperor was often, historically, little more than a death sentence waiting to happen.
Indeed. Chinese history after the Han Dynasty fell, around AD 222, was just this repetitive, brutal cycle of violent and bloody coups. New emperors would briefly consolidate power, usually by killing off their rival generals, only to be assassinated themselves a few years later by their own new generals. To be emperor was to be alone, surrounded by a pack of enemies. It was the least powerful, least secure position in the whole realm. Sung knew these odds intimately. He knew he had to radically break this bloody pattern or he'd face the same grim fate. He couldn't afford to just repeat history.
So how did he manage it? How did he break this entrenched pattern? Soon after becoming emperor, Sung invited his most powerful army commanders, the very men who had helped him get the throne, to a lavish banquet, ostensibly to celebrate the new dynasty. After they drunk plenty of wine, common practice to loosen tongues, lower guards, he dismissed the imperial guards, left just himself and the generals in the room. You can just imagine the tension in that room. These seasoned generals, totally familiar with the bloody history of their nation, they no doubt feared they were about to be summarily slaughtered, their loyalty questioned, punished. That was the traditional way, right?
But Sung had other ideas, far more ingenious, far more effective than just a simple purge. He addressed them directly, revealing his own fears in this disarmingly honest way. The whole day is spent in fear, and I am unhappy both at the table and in my bed. For which one of you does not dream of ascending the throne? He didn't question their loyalty directly, see? That would have put them on the defensive. Instead, he subtly implied that their own ambitious subordinates might force them into rebellion, thrusting the emperor's yellow robe upon them, and how could they possibly refuse such an offer? This masterstroke subtly disarmed them by reframing the threat, making it less about their direct treachery, more about the uncontrollable forces around them. He presented a shared dilemma, not an accusation.
Then came the truly ingenious move. Instead of execution, which was this historical precedent, exactly what the generals must have expected, Sung offered them a life of peaceful enjoyment of riches and honor. He proposed that if they were willing to gracefully give up their military commands, he would provide them with fine estates and beautiful dwellings where you may take your pleasure with singers and girls as your companions. It was an offer they really couldn't refuse. It offered total security, immense luxury, continued honor, all in exchange for power, and without the terrifying risk of betrayal, assassination, or death.
This was a stroke of genius. It showed a profound understanding of human nature, of incentives. He turned a pack of friendly wolves, who would likely have eventually betrayed him, into a group of docile lambs far from all power. The very next day, all the generals, astonished, relieved, deeply grateful, they tendered their resignations and retired as nobles to these magnificent estates Sung had given them. This was infinitely more effective than killing them. That would only have invited vengeance from their families, their followers, perpetuating that ceaseless cycle of violence and instability. He didn't destroy them, he sort of neutered their power base, removed their teeth. And instead of creating martyrs, he created grateful, contented landowners.
But Sung didn't stop there. He continued to use enemies to secure his rule, proving that converting adversaries could be a far more reliable, more lasting strategy than just relying on assumed friends. In AD 971, King Liu of the Southern Han, a longtime rebel, someone who'd resisted Sung's authority for years, but a real thorn in his side, finally surrendered. To Liu's utter astonishment, Sung not only spared him, but gave him a rank in the imperial court, and invited him to a grand palace banquet to seal their newfound friendship.
King Liu, yeah, steeped in the brutal traditions of his time where surrender often meant certain death, naturally feared poison, a common tool of political elimination back then. He hesitated profoundly to drink the wine Sung offered him, crying out, "Your subjects' crimes certainly merit death, but I beg your majesty to spare your subject's life. Indeed, I dare not drink this wine." What did Emperor Sung do? He just laughed, took the glass himself, and swallowed its contents without hesitation. Showed no fear, no ill effect. There was, of course, no poison. It was this profound, almost unthinkable act of trust and magnanimity from the victor to the vanquished.
And the result. From then on, Liu became his most trusted and loyal friend. This is an incredible, almost unbelievable demonstration of turning a bitter, long-standing enemy into a steadfast ally. Not through force or threats, but through this unexpected grand gesture of generosity and apparent deep trust. He completely broke the mold.
Another equally compelling example, Chen Shu. A defeated king, a known conspirator against Sung. Sung's ministers, always cautious, advised imprisonment. They even presented him with documents proving Chen Shu was still actively plotting against the emperor even after his defeat. Yet when Chen Shu came to visit the emperor, Sung honored him instead of punishing him. He even gave Chen Shu a package, telling him to open it only when he was halfway home on his return journey. Inside, all the incriminating papers documenting his conspiracy.
Now,
Chen Shu realized Sung knew everything, yet had spared him. This act of profound generosity and trust, it just won him over completely. The sheer surprise of it cultivated this deep, unbreakable loyalty.
the interpretation here is incredibly powerful. There's a Chinese proverb, friends are like the jaws and teeth of a dangerous animal. Sung understood this implicitly, maybe better than anyone. He systematically avoided relying on friends in the army, in government, recognizing the inherent danger of trusting those who might feel entitled or envious. Instead of eliminating them violently, he either bribed them into comfortable, powerless retirement or carefully kept them at a respectful professional distance. And crucially, he cultivated his deepest, most reliable loyalty from his enemies.
The reason, when you unpack it, is brilliantly clear. While a friend expects more and more favors and frequently seethes with jealousy over your successes, these former enemies expected nothing and got everything. A man suddenly spared the guillotine is a grateful man indeed, right? And will go to extraordinary lengths to prove their worth and loyalty for their benefactor. They feel this profound sense of indebtedness, often a desire to justify the incredible chance they've been given. These former enemies, once adversaries, became Sung's most trusted allies precisely because their loyalty was built on a foundation of surprising generosity and pragmatic self-interest, rather than emotional expectation or assumed entitlement. Niccolo Machiavelli observed this very thing, stating that princes have found more faith and more usefulness in those men whom at the beginning of their power they regarded with suspicion than in those they at first confided in. The Mahabharata's cold, ancient wisdom also rings true here. No pauper is friend to the rich, no fool to the wise, no coward to the brave, an old friend who needs him. It's a deeply pragmatic view of relationships, stripped of all sentimentality, focused purely on utility and reliability. And the Roman historian Tacitus's grim assessment encapsulates the core psychological principle. Men are more ready to repay an injury than a benefit because gratitude is a burden and revenge is a pleasure. That debt of gratitude can feel heavier, more oppressive than the satisfaction of revenge.
And the outcome for some. He finally broke that centuries-long pattern of coups, violence, civil war that had plagued China. The Song dynasty ruled China for more than 300 years, ushering in an era of unprecedented stability, prosperity, cultural flourishing. What a stark contrast to the brief, bloody, and ultimately fatal reign of Michael III. It brings to mind Abraham Lincoln's famous quote during the American Civil War. When an elderly lady chastised him for not labeling Southerners irreconcilable enemies,
He famously replied, "Why, madam, do I not destroy my enemies when I make them my friends?" It's a powerful, pragmatic philosophy, isn't it? Okay, let's try and distill these dramatic historical stories into some general principles. The underlying keys to power, as our source calls them. Why exactly are friends so problematic in the realm of power, so often turning into liabilities instead of dependable assets?
The source points to several compelling reasons. Firstly, you often just don't know your friends as well as you really think you do. In social settings, friends agree on things in order to avoid an argument, right? They meticulously cover up their unpleasant qualities so they don't offend each other or disrupt the harmony. They might laugh extra hard at your bad jokes. Since complete honesty rarely strengthens a friendship, you may never truly know how a friend feels about you, your decisions, a situation, because they'll often tell you exactly what you want to hear. This creates a dangerous, often fatal blind spot for anyone in power who needs accurate information, unvarnished feedback.
That makes perfect sense. We look for comfort, affirmation from friends, not necessarily hard truths. And when you decide to hire a friend, bring them into a professional working relationship. That's where things seem to get really unbalanced, almost inherently unstable. Your very act of kindness, your help, ironically, can injure the friendship itself.
Precisely. People inherently want to feel they deserve their good fortune, that they've earned their position through their own merit, hard work, competence, not through charity or just because they know somebody. Receiving a favor, especially a big one like a job or a high position, can feel oppressive or even condescending to the recipient because it constantly reminds them they were chosen for friendship, not necessarily for being the most deserving or competent candidate available. This internal conflict, this tension between pride and indebtedness, often leads to these flashes of resentment and envy that just fester beneath the surface, slowly but surely eroding the friendship. The more favors and gifts you supply trying to revive or solidify the friendship, the less genuine gratitude you often get back. This phenomenon of ingratitude, it has a long and deep history, and its persistent power to surprise and disillusion us, despite how common it is truly astonishing. The core lesson here is pragmatic. It's always better to be wary. If you never expect gratitude from a friend, you'll be pleasantly surprised when they do prove grateful. But you won't be disillusioned or betrayed when, inevitably, they sometimes don't.
So the very act of trying to help a friend professionally can inadvertently create this subtle internal enemy. And crucially, using friends will inevitably limit your power. Friends are rarely the most able or skilled individuals for a given task, are they? They might be wonderful companions, great to hang out with, but that doesn't automatically mean they have professional competence or strategic smarts.
Exactly. Skill and competence are far more important than friendly feelings when you're trying to achieve something real, something that requires actual results. Think back to Michael III, and Basilius Michael had Blardus right under his nose, a man far more qualified, more experienced to lead the army, advise the emperor. But he chose friendship over competence with utterly devastating results for his reign and his life. All working situations require a kind of distance between people. You're trying to achieve specific objectives, right? Accomplish a mission, not necessarily make friends. Friendliness, whether it's genuine or just put on, often obscures that essential fact. It blurs the necessary boundaries, the lines of authority needed for effective operation. The key to maintaining and expanding power, then, is the ability to coldly, objectively judge who is best able to further your interests in all situations, regardless of personal feelings or old emotional bonds. Keep friends for friendship, for emotional support, companionship. But when it comes to work, strategy, power, always work with the skilled, the competent, the most effective.
That's a powerful distinction. So, if friends are such a minefield, let's flip it. Why are enemies, paradoxically, an untapped gold mine? How can someone who actively opposes you become a more reliable asset than a loyal friend?
The source gives a fantastic, almost unbelievable historical example for this. When Talleyrand, Napoleon's brilliant but pragmatic foreign minister, decided back in 1807 that his boss was leading France to ruin, and it was time to subtly turn against him. He needed a partner for this dangerous, high-stakes conspiracy. Who did he choose? Joseph Fouché, the notoriously cunning head of the secret police. And ironically, Talleyrand's most hated enemy, a man who had even tried to have him assassinated in the past.
Why on earth would you choose an enemy, let alone your most hated one, for such a high-stakes plot that could literally cost both of them their lives? Seems like madness on the surface. Surely a friend would be more reliable.
It seems like madness, yeah. But Talleyrand understood the subtle dynamics. He knew their former hatred would, surprisingly, create an opportunity for an emotional reconciliation. He understood that Fouché would expect nothing from him, having been a bitter adversary for so long, and would, in fact, worked tirelessly to prove that he was worthy of Talleyrand's unexpected choice. You see, a person who has something profound to prove will move mountains for you. Most importantly, their relationship, having bypassed all that usual emotional baggage of friendship, would be based purely on mutual self-interest, not personal feeling or old grudges. That makes it incredibly stable because both knew exactly where they stood and what was at stake. There was no pretense, no emotional debt to repay, only a clear, shared objective: Napoleon's downfall.
And it worked. Well, kind of. While they didn't succeed in unseating Napoleon directly, that was probably too big a task for just two individuals. Their unlikely union did generate significant strategic opposition. It planted seeds of anti-emperor sentiment among the elite. The lesson here is clear and pretty cutting. Whenever you can, bury the hatchet with an enemy and make a profound point of putting him in your service. It's about pragmatism, not personal feelings or holding on to old grudges.
We even see this principle playing out in modern history with Henry Kissinger, a master of diplomatic strategy. In 1971, during the highly contentious Vietnam War, Kissinger was the target of an unsuccessful kidnapping attempt by this radical anti-war group, including the Berrigan brothers, a pair of Catholic priests. Instead of involving the Secret Service or the Justice Department, escalating the conflict, Kissinger, with remarkable audacity, privately arranged a Saturday morning meeting with 3 of the alleged kidnappers.
He completely charmed them, didn't he? Explaining, with his unique blend of intellect and persuasion, that most American soldiers would be out of Vietnam by mid-1972. It was a masterclass in disarming an adversary with unexpected candor and a glimpse of a shared future. They ended up giving him kidnap Kissinger buttons as a sign of their strange truce. And one of them apparently remained a friend for years, even visiting him several times. This wasn't just a one-off trick either. Kissinger actually made it a consistent policy of working with those who disagreed with him.
His colleagues even noted he seemed to get along better with his enemies than with his friends. This powerfully underscores the practical effectiveness of engaging adversaries, converting them not through force, but through unexpected gestures of magnanimity, by revealing shared interests or objectives, and by focusing on pragmatic outcomes rather than getting bogged down by past animosities or emotional baggage. It's a remarkable ability, really, to see past the conflict to the potential for alliance.
Beyond just converting them, the source also suggests enemies can be valuable simply by existing, even if they stay enemies. Without enemies around us, we grow lazy. An enemy at our heels sharpens our wits, keeping us focused and alert. Maybe it can sometimes be better to use enemies as enemies rather than always trying to turn them into allies because their very opposition forces you to define yourself and your goals more clearly.
That's a fascinating perspective. Plutarch, the ancient Greek biographer, he tells how King Harrow of Syracuse only learned he had bad breath when an enemy publicly called him out on it, whereas his wife and friends, presumably out of politeness or fear of offending him, had never mentioned it. This illustrates how enemies, unlike friends who might coddle you or flatter you, can provide those unvarnished, often uncomfortable truths that help us identify and address our faults or weaknesses. They offer an unfiltered, albeit often hostile perspective that friends, bound by affection or social norms, might hold back. Your enemies often tell you what you need to hear, not necessarily what you want to hear.
And then there's Mao Zedong's approach to conflict, which really exemplifies this idea of using enemies to strengthen yourself. During the 1937 Japanese invasion of China, some communist leaders wanted to just let the nationalists fight the Japanese while they, the communists, recuperated and conserved their strength. But Mao vehemently disagreed. He argued that fighting a formidable foe like the Japanese would be the perfect training for their ragtag army, rather than letting them grow rusty and complacent sitting out of combat.
Mao's plan, though maybe brutal in its implications, worked with ruthless efficiency. By the time the Japanese finally retreated from China, the communists had gained invaluable fighting experience, strategic acumen, and the hardened resolve needed to decisively defeat the nationalists in the civil war that followed. Years later, Mao even famously thanked a Japanese visitor for the invasion, saying, "Without a worthy opponent, a man or group cannot grow stronger." This reflects a belief that conflict, when managed strategically and crucially survived, is an unparalleled catalyst for growth, strength, and internal cohesion. It forges resilience.
So Mao's strategy of constant conflict, or at least leveraging existing conflict, had several key parts. First, ensuring ultimate victory. You don't pick a fight with someone you aren't absolutely sure you can defeat in the long run. Second, if you have no obvious enemies, sometimes strategically setting up a convenient target or even turning a former friend into an enemy to create that necessary opposition and purpose. And third, brilliantly using such enemies to define your cause more clearly to the public, framing it as a struggle of good versus evil or righteous struggle against oppression. He even actively encouraged disagreements with both the Soviet Union and the U.S. because he believed that without clear-cut enemies, his people would lose any sense of what Chinese communism meant and would just become complacent.
A sharply defined enemy is a far stronger argument for your side than all the words you could possibly put together. The man of power, then, welcomes conflict, not for chaos, but for clarity. They use enemies to enhance his reputation as a sure-footed fighter who can be relied upon in times of uncertainty, a leader who knows how to navigate adversity. It's the stark image of the jaws of ingratitude that the source paints. Knowing what would happen if you put a finger in a lion's mouth, you'd wisely stay clear. With friends, you will have no such caution, and if you hire them, they will eat you alive with ingratitude. Baltasar Gracian, the Spanish Jesuit philosopher, sums it up perfectly. You must learn to grab a sword, not by its blade, which would cut you, but by the handle, which allows you to defend yourself. The wise man profits more from his enemies than a fool from his friends.
Oh, wow. Okay, now, after all that, after hearing the cautionary tales, the strategic triumphs, is there any scenario where trusting a friend is advisable? Or where they could be useful in this treacherous realm of power?
Yeah.
Is there a reversal to this seemingly absolute law that allows for exceptions? It feels so unyielding.
Well, the source does offer a more nuanced perspective, acknowledging that few rules are truly absolute. While generally advising against mixing work and friendship, there are indeed rare times when a friend can be used to greater effect than an enemy. This is particularly true for what the source calls dirty work, unsavory acts that simply have to be done, but for which a leader needs a clear appearance of deniability. Friends, paradoxically, often do this best, since their affection and loyalty for the leader makes them willing to take chances and perform tasks others, perhaps more rational, less emotionally invested, might flatly refuse.
So like using them as a scapegoat, sacrificing them for political cover or to divert blame, that's a particularly cynical use, isn't it?
Exactly. Kings throughout history often use this fall of the favorite trick. They'd let a close friend or trusted courtier take the fall for a major mistake or a public failure, knowing the general public wouldn't believe the ruler would deliberately sacrifice a cherished friend for such a purpose. This offers excellent political cover, effectively diverts blame from the true power holder. But the cost, of course, is the absolute permanent loss of that friend. The source advises reserving this extremely risky role for someone close to you but not too close. Someone whose loyalty you can count on for that specific singular purpose, but whose loss won't devastate your emotional well-being or your broader strategic plans. It's a one-time, calculated sacrifice.
So a friend for a very specific, dangerous, and ultimately self-sacrificial purpose, where their affection makes them willing to take chances and absorb the consequences. But it's a highly cynical, arguably cruel, one-time use scenario, not really a basis for enduring collaboration.
Yes, and it must be approached with extreme, almost paranoid caution. The core problem remains steadfast. Friendship fundamentally confuses the boundaries and distances that working requires. It inherently blurs the lines between professional objective and personal emotion, making objective judgment incredibly difficult and creating profound vulnerabilities. However, the source states that if both partners understand the dangers involved, and if the friend is genuinely aware of the cold, transactional nature of the task, a friend can sometimes be employed to great effect in these very specific high-risk scenarios. But even then, you must never let your guard down in such a venture. You must always be on the lookout for any signs of emotional disturbance such as envy and ingratitude. The underlying principle remains unflinching. Nothing is stable in the realm of power, and even the closest of friends can be transformed into the worst of enemies.
What a deep dive this has been into the intricate, often unsettling dynamics of human connection and power. We've seen loyalty twisted into the most chilling betrayal with Michael III. We've witnessed enemies transformed into the most steadfast allies by the strategic genius of Emperor Sung. And we've grappled with the chilling, pragmatic truth about human nature when power, ambition, and self-interest are squarely on the line.
The core takeaway from this, I think, is not by any means to live in constant fear or mistrust everyone you meet. Rather, it's to cultivate a profound, discerning awareness of the underlying dynamics at play in any relationship, especially when personal interests, status, or power are involved. Friendship, with its inherent emotional complexities, its often unspoken expectations of gratitude, entitlement, blind loyalty, it can inadvertently introduce vulnerabilities that clear-eyed self-interest or a carefully calculated alliance often entirely avoids. It compels us, maybe, to reevaluate relationships based on what they truly offer in a given context, rather than solely on sentiment or how long we've known someone.
This isn't about being heartless or discarding human connection entirely. It's about being strategically wise, deeply discerning. It's about truly understanding that the person who owes you nothing, having been shown unexpected mercy or opportunity, might ironically prove more reliable, more genuinely grateful than the one who believes they owe you everything, but who might actually feel burdened or even resentful of your past kindness. It's a challenging thought, definitely. A provocative reevaluation of our most cherished bonds, perhaps. But maybe a profoundly necessary one for navigating a complex, competitive world where intentions aren't always what they seem.
And so we leave you with this provocative thought to mull over. In your own life, in your own circles, consider the hidden costs of assumed gratitude. Are there relationships where an honest adversary, or maybe just a clearly defined opponent, might actually serve your personal growth and clarify your objectives better than an overly agreeable friend who never really challenges you? What stands out to you about these powerful stories of loyalty, betrayal, and strategic alliance?
Until our next deep dive, keep digging for those nuggets of insight.